Hello, my friends. Welcome back. I hope you're having a peaceful day. Today, I want to tell you a very special story, a story about a queen. She lived more than 2,000 years ago. She was beautiful, she was brilliant, and she outsmarted some of the most powerful men in history. Before empires became legends, before Rome cast its shadow across the ancient world, before the name Cleopatra became a symbol of beauty, power, and mystery, there was a young girl growing up beside the blue waters of the Mediterranean. She was born into a palace, but her life was never safe. She inherited great wealth, but her kingdom was surrounded by danger. She wore a crown, and that crown came with betrayal, war, and impossible choices. For over 2,000 years, people have remembered Cleopatra as a queen of charm. But her true power was something much greater. She was educated, strategic, multilingual, fearless. This is the story of Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh of Egypt. A woman who stood between two worlds, the ancient kingdom of the Nile and the rising might of Rome. Her life was filled with love, ambition, loss, and courage. Her ending was tragic, but her legacy became immortal. A child of Alexandria, Cleopatra was born in 69 BC in Alexandria, one of the most extraordinary cities of the ancient world. Alexandria was more than a royal capital. It was a meeting place of cultures, languages, ships, scholars, and dreamers. Its great harbor welcomed vessels from across the Mediterranean. Its lighthouse, one of the seven wonders of the ancient world, guided sailors safely to Egypt's shore. And its famous library drew the greatest minds of the age: mathematicians, astronomers, physicians, poets, and philosophers. Cleopatra's family descended from a Macedonian Greek dynasty, founded after the death of Alexander the Great. For nearly 300 years, the Ptolemies had ruled Egypt. They lived in Egyptian palaces. They took Egyptian titles. They appeared before their people as pharaohs, but in their hearts, most of them remained Greek. Cleopatra was different. She didn't want to rule from a distance. She wanted to understand the people she governed. So she did something almost none of her ancestors had bothered to do. She learned the Egyptian language, and by speaking to her people in their own tongue, she built a bridge between the palace and the streets. She also studied Greek literature, mathematics, philosophy, and science. She learned how to speak with diplomats, how to read the ambitions of powerful men. From a very young age, Cleopatra understood something simple, yet powerful. Knowledge protects a ruler better than jewels, or walls, or even armies. A kingdom under pressure. Egypt was rich, but it was no longer as strong as it once had been. The Nile still gave its people grain, wealth, and life. But across the sea, Rome was rising, crushing kings, conquering nations, turning once proud empires into mere provinces. Cleopatra's father, Ptolemy XII, tried to protect his throne the only way he knew how: by pleasing Rome. He paid tribute. He offered gifts. He begged for Roman favor. To his own people, this made him look weak. To Rome, it made Egypt look like a prize, just waiting to be taken. When Ptolemy XII died in 51 BC, Cleopatra was only 18 years old. By royal tradition, she was to rule alongside her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, a boy of about 10. On paper, they shared the throne, but in truth, there was no contest. Cleopatra was the stronger mind, and everyone in the palace knew it. She handled foreign affairs. She shaped royal policy. She acted like the ruler she truly was, and that confidence terrified the men around her. The palace advisors didn't want a queen who could think for herself. They wanted a child they could control. So the whispers began. Cleopatra was too ambitious, they said, too independent, too willing to break tradition. The battle for Egypt didn't start on a battlefield. It started with rumors, suspicion, and secret plans whispered through palace corridors. Exile and return. Eventually, the plotting succeeded, and Cleopatra was forced to flee Egypt. She escaped to Syria, torn from the throne she believed was rightfully hers. Back in Alexandria, many assumed her story was finished. But exile didn't destroy Cleopatra. It sharpened her. In Syria, she gathered allies. She negotiated with local leaders. She began building an army. She did not sit and mourn her fate. She prepared to take it back. Meanwhile, Rome was tearing itself apart in civil war. Julius Caesar, one of the greatest generals the world had ever seen, was chasing his defeated rival, Pompey, across the Mediterranean. Pompey fled to Egypt, hoping for protection. Instead, the advisors of young Ptolemy XIII had him murdered, hoping to win favor with Caesar. It backfired completely. When Caesar arrived in Alexandria and learned what had happened, he was furious. Pompey had been his rival, but he was still a Roman. To Caesar, the killing was a disgrace, and Egypt's royal court had badly misjudged him. Cleopatra saw her opening. If she could reach Caesar, if she could speak to him directly, she might win his support. But Alexandria's palace was guarded by her brother's men. Walking through the front gates would mean death. So she chose a different path. She chose courage over safety. The queen inside the carpet. One night, with the help of her loyal servant Apollodorus, Cleopatra was smuggled into the palace, hidden inside a rolled carpet, or perhaps a bedding sack. Historians still debate the exact details, but the meaning of the moment is unmistakable. She risked her life for one chance to stand before Caesar. When the bundle was finally unrolled, Cleopatra didn't emerge as a frightened refugee. She emerged as a queen, one who understood perfectly the power of a dramatic entrance. Caesar saw it immediately: intelligence, bravery, command. Cleopatra laid out her case: her rightful claim to the throne, the corruption surrounding her brother, the danger facing all of Egypt. She wasn't simply asking for help. She was presenting herself as exactly what Egypt needed, and exactly the ally Rome could trust. Caesar chose to back her. Ptolemy XIII and his advisors refused to accept it, and Alexandria erupted into war. Roman soldiers held the palace while Egyptian forces surrounded them. Fires spread near the harbor, and ancient writers later linked this chaos to damage near Alexandria's great library, though just how much was destroyed remains uncertain. After months of fighting, Roman reinforcements finally arrived. Ptolemy XIII fled and drowned trying to escape across the Nile. Cleopatra was queen once again. Her courage had changed the entire course of her life. Queen beside Caesar, Cleopatra ruled again, but Egypt's independence hung by a thread. Her alliance with Caesar offered protection. It also bound her fate to Rome more tightly than ever before. She and Caesar spent time together in Egypt, and Cleopatra gave birth to a son, Caesarion, Little Caesar. For Cleopatra, that child meant far more than motherhood. He represented a future where Egypt and Rome might be joined through blood, through power, through legitimacy. But Rome wasn't ready for that future. Not even close. Cleopatra later traveled to Rome, staying close to Caesar. Her presence unsettled the city. Romans already feared Caesar's growing power, and they despised the idea of a foreign queen whispering in his ear. To Rome's conservatives, Cleopatra became everything they feared, wrapped into one woman: monarchy, luxury, and foreign influence. Then, in 44 BC, Julius Caesar was assassinated, struck down by senators who believed he'd become a threat to the Republic. His death shook the entire world. Suddenly vulnerable, Cleopatra fled back to Egypt with her young son. Once again, her future was uncertain. She had already survived exile, war, palace betrayal. Now she faced an entirely new Rome, one torn apart by ambition, revenge, and a desperate fight over who would inherit Caesar's power. Mark Antony. After Caesar's death, Rome fell into yet another struggle for control. One of the men who rose to power was Mark Antony, a soldier, a statesman, and a former ally of Caesar. He shared authority with Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir. But from the very beginning, their partnership was built on cracks. Antony controlled Rome's eastern territories, and his armies needed money. Egypt was the wealthiest kingdom in the eastern Mediterranean. Cleopatra needed Roman protection. Antony needed Egyptian gold. Their meeting at Tarsus became one of the most famous scenes in ancient history. Cleopatra arrived by ship. Purple sails, silver oars, music drifting across the water, the air thick with incense. It wasn't just beauty. It was political theater. Cleopatra understood something few rulers ever grasp. Sometimes, you speak louder through symbols than through words. Antony was captivated completely. Their relationship became personal and political at once. They had children together. He granted her family new territories. To their allies in the east, they looked like an unstoppable partnership. To Octavian, back in Rome, they became the perfect enemy. Octavian told the Roman people that Antony had forgotten his homeland, that he'd surrendered himself to a foreign queen's spell. He turned the conflict into something bigger than a war for power. He turned it into a war against an idea, the dangerous, seductive foreign queen. Propaganda became a weapon as sharp as any sword. The Battle of Actium. By 31 BC, the struggle had reached its breaking point, near Actium, on the western coast of Greece. Antony and Cleopatra gathered their ships and their forces. The sea itself became the stage for a battle that would decide the fate of two civilizations. The fighting was chaotic. Octavian's brilliant commander, Agrippa, had already weakened Antony's position before the battle even began. Supplies were thin. Morale was cracking. Many of Antony's own allies had started to doubt him. Then, in the middle of the battle, Cleopatra's ships broke through the line and sailed away. Antony followed her, abandoning much of his fleet behind him. Historians still argue about why. Was it a planned retreat, or a desperate decision made in the chaos of a collapsing battle? Either way, the result was catastrophic. Antony's forces surrendered, and the road to Egypt lay open for Octavian. Cleopatra and Antony returned home, but the end was closing in. They tried to rally support. It didn't come. Fear of Octavian spread like wildfire. Allies vanished. Armies switched sides. Everything they had built began to fade, like light at the end of the day. A year later, Octavian entered Egypt. Antony, wrongly told that Cleopatra had already died, took his own life. He was carried to her and died in her arms. The queen who had once stood beside two of Rome's greatest men was now completely alone. The last choice. Octavian captured Cleopatra, but he didn't kill her. Not yet. He wanted something else. He wanted to parade her through the streets of Rome, in chains, as the ultimate trophy of his victory. For a queen who had spent her entire life fighting to rule, to negotiate, to protect her country's dignity, this was the one outcome she could never accept. In 30 BC, Cleopatra died. She was 39 years old. Ancient accounts say she took her own life, perhaps by poison. The legend of the snake bite became part of her story, though the truth of how she died remains unknown, even today. With her death, the age of the pharaohs came to an end. Egypt became a province of Rome. Octavian would soon become Augustus, Rome's first emperor. And the fragile balance Cleopatra had spent her life maintaining between two worlds disappeared forever. But Cleopatra herself never disappeared. Her story lived on, sometimes twisted, sometimes romanticized, often misunderstood. But underneath all the myths lies a simple truth. She was one of the most capable political minds the ancient world ever produced. The legacy of Cleopatra. Cleopatra's life was never just a story about beauty and romance. It was the story of a leader, born into danger, trained for power, and forced to survive in a world ruled by empires